What's up, everybody? It's HBT, man, with Straight Up Wrestling Show, guys. I'm going to talk about Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, man. And hey, this is a guy, I'm going to tell you, when I first started watching wrestling, this guy, Ricky Steamboat, he was my favorite wrestler. I know I talk about Ric Flair, and Ric Flair is my ultimate number one wrestler of all time. There's no ends, ands, or buts about that. And there was a time when Ric Flair wasn't my number one wrestler. When I first started watching wrestling, I will say, when it boils down to it, I did not have a fan favorite. I didn't have one single wrestler that I liked when I first started watching wrestling. When I first started watching wrestling, the person that really turned me on to wrestling, that really caught my attention, and that was in 1975, man. Wahoo McDaniel, Chief Wahoo McDaniel really caught my attention. I never really liked Chief Wahoo McDaniel, but everybody did. Everybody was crazy about the big Indian man, hey, the hard chops and everything. But what really caught my attention is when he knocked the teeth out of Boris Malenko, Dean Malenko's father. So when he knocked the teeth out of Boris Malenko, that right there really caught my attention, really got me into watching wrestling. Now, when I was watching wrestling, a few years before that, guys, around 71, 72, when I was 4 or 5 years old, I had started watching wrestling, and yes, that tells my age, guys. I'm definitely up there, man. But I started watching wrestling in the early 70s. My older brother was watching it, and I was always like, what in the world's going on here? What is this? I really didn't care for it. And, I saw people like Nelson Royal. I saw George and Sandy Scott. I saw Johnny Weaver and people like that on Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling back in the early 70s. And so, I really did not care for a lot of those guys that I actually saw coming up, Jack and Jerry Briscoe. I really didn't have a fan favorite at that time. I wasn't, I wasn't a fan of any sort of wrestler because I really wasn't into it. Now, I would look at these guys and I'd be like, nobody really caught my interest until I saw Chief Wahoo McDaniel and Boris Malenko wrestle. I think that was in 75. Now, in 1974, I did start seeing Ric Flair. Ric Flair had came to the Mid-Atlantic Championship area, and he was teaming with Rip Hawk. I did like that team. I thought they was cool. I thought they had a coolness flair to them. Kind of reminded me of where I was growing up at the time in Sterling, the Sterling community in Greenville, South Carolina. I guess you can call the hood back in the day. But hey, where I was coming up at, a lot of guys had that type of flair, or the guys that was known in the neighborhood. I'm not sure they was doing anything illegal or not, but the cool guys, man, had that flair. Ric Flair was trying to, even though he was a bigger guy at that time, man. He was a bigger guy, tag team partner of Rip Hawk. But Rip Hawk used to be cool. He would wear these suits, and he would always be smoking a cigar or whatever, and Ric Flair was with him, and Ric Flair was trying to be cool. I think he had more of a Dusty Rhodes type look, trying to be like Dusty Rhodes. When it boils down to it, that's what he was trying to be at that time. But man, hey, none of these guys were my favorites. Like up until like 74, I think Ric Flair came, and I said, okay, that's somebody I can really get attached to, because not just my brothers was watching it. When I would go over to my grandma's house, which I went there every weekend, I was there with my grandma every weekend on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. I was with my grandma, my aunts and uncles, and they always watched it. So I was, kind of pushed into watching that. When I wasn't playing with my Army Man and stuff like that. You only can play with Army Man, Cowboys, and Indians so many times. So anytime wrestling came on, everybody turned off the lights in the house, and everybody sat in this one room, and hey, we all watched wrestling, ate cookies, and watched wrestling. That's just what we did, on the weekend. And there was like two programs, one on Saturday morning, one on Saturday night. And for some reason, I kind of remember one on Sunday night. I'm not sure. But yeah, we always watch wrestling. And then on Mondays, I was with them until Mondays, and we'll go to Monday night. We'll go see Monday nights, the Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling. Jim Crockett Promotions ran a show every Monday night at Greenville Memorial Auditorium. And so I would go there every Monday night with them and saw stars like Ric Flair, Chief Wahoo McDaniel, Johnny Valentine, Nelson Royal, George Sandy Scott, Ivan Koloff, Baron Von Raschke, whoever else came up during that time. I saw those guys, man. But here comes around 1976. There's a guy that entered the territory. Now, Ric Flair did become my favorite wrestler in 1975. He had came back from the plane crash and everything. He had came back from the plane crash, and man, he just came back a totally different guy. He had changed his gimmick, became the nature boy, started, hitting that woo yell. And that's the first time I really noticed it, because he was doing it when he was with Rip Hawk, but you really didn't notice it. But he came back and he was doing the woo yell, and he was hanging out with more Blackjack Mulligan. Rip Hawk had retired, had pretty much, I think, left the area, and Ric Flair just became my favorite wrestler, man. It happened on a Monday night in Greenville, South Carolina. He was taking on Chief Wahoo McDaniel. He hit Wahoo McDaniel with a 2x4. And man, like I say, and he hit that big woo! And man, I just, I lit up. I was 8 years old at that time, and I was like, wow, that's my favorite wrestler. That's when I fell in love with wrestling. I fell in love right there with wrestling. And Ric Flair, he was my favorite. He was my favorite wrestler. No ends, ands, and buts about it. There was another guy named Tim Woods, Mr. Wrestling Tim Woods, who I really got a flair for, and I really started liking Mr. Wrestling Tim Woods at that time too. But Ric Flair was my number one wrestler. He was my favorite wrestler. No ends, ands, and buts about it. Then come along in 1976. But there's another wrestler, let me say, who was also that I did like outside of Ric Flair. Ric Flair, Mr. Wrestling 2, and Ric Flair was not Mr. Wrestling 2, Mr. Wrestling Tim Woods, and there was another guy named Tiger Conway Jr. Tiger Conway Jr., I liked him. Black man that pretty much had an afro, a very good athlete, very talented wrestler. I definitely liked him, man. He was something special. He was something special to watch. I was like, wow, this guy's incredible. And what was good about him and Ric Flair, and the only reason he didn't overtake Ric Flair in my eyes, man, is because him and Ric Flair had a rivalry. They had a feud, and so it was hard to pick. So of course I picked Ric Flair over that. And my aunts and the uncles and all them, they was with Tiger Conway Jr., my grandma, and because they was all against me, man. Everybody was against me. People at school and everything was against me because I like Ric Flair. But then in 1976. Here comes a guy, man, that, here comes this Hawaiian kid, man. I was just like, wow, incredible in the ring, in and out of the ring, could get up, high flying, had a, nice build to him, and, throwing some serious chops. Kind of remind me of Wahoo McDaniel, but outside of those chops, he had other stuff along with those chops, man. Incredible athlete all the way around. So, like I said, I started, immediately I started liking this guy. I'm like, wow, man, he was incredible. So, watching him wrestle, and the first match, he debuted and he wrestled against Ric Flair. He beat Ric Flair. I was shocked. I was stunned. But I had a choice. I had to make a choice. I'm like, wow, which one of these guys I like the best? And man, I have to say, I like Ricky Steamboat better. To me, he was a better wrestler, even though I thought Ric Flair was an incredible wrestler. Forget about everything what other people say about him or whatever. They look at, hey, Ric Flair is, great on the mic. Ric Flair was just the, consummate character in the ring. But this guy, Ric Flair, man, was an incredible wrestler. Very, very good technical wrestler. When it boils down to it, he knew every aspect of the game. But here comes a kid, man, in my eyes, that looked better than him, that wrestled better than him, and actually had a better look than him. And because Ric Flair was getting all the women, doing all the talking and everything. Ricky Steamboat was so good, you didn't even really pay attention to how well he talked or whatever. He did not go out there and brag on his skills and brag about who he was and try to pull women like that. He was just interested in going in there and taking care of business in and out of that ring. But guys, brutal, 1976, 1977, brutal feud started between Ric Flair and Ricky Steamboat. And so that was incredible, man. And so those guys started going at it there for a while, man. I think between like 76 to 78, they had a long-standing feud back and forth. But I had them as far as my top two wrestlers. I had Ricky Steamboat number one during that time. Ricky Steamboat and Ric Flair number two, and that was all the way up until Ricky Steamboat. I think in 84, 85, he went over to he left the Mid-Atlantic area and he went to Where did he went over to the WWF, man, which is now the WWE, but he went over to the WWF. But all that time in Crockett Promotions, that was my number one wrestler. That was my favorite wrestler, Ricky Steamboat. And he did so many incredible things after his feud with Flair. Him and Ricky Steamboat, he teamed up with Paul Jones, who was another guy who was probably my number 4 favorite wrestler. He's somebody I liked before Ricky Steamboat got there, and he was one of my top 3 or 4 guys. Number 1, Paul Jones, incredible wrestler, man. Him and Ricky Steamboat teamed up to win the World Tag Team Championships, and incredible tag team. I think they teamed between like almost a year. Those guys was together, if not a year. But that was an incredible tag team, man. I was very impressed with those guys around 1979. Very impressed with them. And I think they didn't lose those titles until, I think, who was that? I'm not exactly sure who defeated those two. But I think Paul Jones ended up turning on Ricky Steamboat. I'm thinking the Anderson brothers maybe had recaptured the titles from those two. But they was an incredible tag team, man. And then Ricky Steamboat at that time, man, he pretty much stayed in that tag team realm. Now he right after that, I think he won the United States Championship. He won that from Flair, or was it Roddy Piper? Yeah, he won it from Flair. Then him and Roddy Piper got into a feud, which was a very good feud. I think between like 79, 80, it was an incredible. Ric Flair pretty much was going back and forth from heel to fan favorite, and him and Steamboat became friends around that time. But Ric Flair was getting into that. He was getting into that spectrum to where he was being propped up to be the world champion. Ric Flair would come and he would win the United States Championship, but he still was traveling. Ric Flair was traveling at that time. He was traveling a lot to Japan. He was traveling, with Andre and a lot of those guys doing a lot of different things. He would be out in Missouri. He would be in a lot of different places, getting his name out there, which was already out there. He immediately became famous, like after 77, 75, 77. His fame started, but it was really rising at this time. And Dusty Rhodes had won the championship from Hardy Race, I think in 81, and then Ric Flair took it within a few months from Dusty Rhodes, and that was the beginning of Ric Flair. And man, yeah, love Ric Flair, but still, between like 81 to 85, I think until Steamboat signed with WWF, Ric Flair was my number 2 wrestler. Even though I talk about him so much, and he's my favorite wrestler of all time, Ricky Steamboat was my number 1 wrestler. But during this time, man, you had Ricky Steamboat, who teamed up with Jay Youngblood, and they had a long, that was a long-standing tag team, and those guys was incredible, man. And hey, they are a candidate for the greatest tag team of all time. I have to say that. Even though when I think about it, I'm gonna have to put them around that 3 to 5 mark, because the number 1 tag team that I ever saw was the Anderson brothers. No ends, ands, or buts about that. Ole and Gene Anderson. I'm going to say that to this day. They are the greatest tag team that I've ever seen. Those guys was dominant. And this during that time, back in Crockett, when I was watching, like I said, I was watching Ric Flair. I was watching Ricky Steamboat. I was watching Blackjack Mulligan. Only team that, if they would have stayed together, only team that I say that could have been greater than that team, if they would have stayed together maybe 2 or 3 years, maybe 3 years, then I would say their legacy as a tag team would have been better than the Anderson brothers. And that is, man, the team of Ric Flair and Greg the Hammer Valentine. You talking about a great tag team. Those guys, I think, teamed up in 77 or something. I think it was 77 when those guys decided to team up. It's either 76 or 77, but I'm pretty sure it was around 77. I was around 10 years old, but they teamed up, and man, that was a great tag team. That was a devastating tag team. But then Greg Valentine turned a little later. He turned against Ric Flair. Greg Valentine had his own ambitions as a singles champion, and man, I mean, he became Mid-Atlantic Heavyweight Champion. He was I think he was a TV champion, Mid-Atlantic TV champion, and he was a United States champion. Greg the Hammer Valentine was something special, man, something special, and he just, like I said, he's one of the greatest singles wrestlers of all time, man. I mean, he does not get the credit that he deserves. He's definitely underrated, straight up. But man, this is about Ricky Steamboat, and like I said, Ricky Steamboat teamed up with Jay Youngblood to win another tag team championship. And I was like, wow, how in the world can he team up with somebody that's going to give him better chemistry than he had with number 1 Paul Jones, man. Number 1 Paul Jones and Ricky Steamboat was incredible. I mean, just incredible. But they took, it went from incredible to amazing to to out of this world when he got with Ricky Steamboat. Those guys was just, man, the joint, and it took a long time before somebody actually beat them and kept them from winning the titles, because I do think they traded the titles a couple times. I think once with the Andersons and somebody else. Sergeant Slaughter, Don Kernodle a couple times, and Jack and Jerry Briscoe is the team. Jack and Jerry Briscoe came to the Mid-Atlantic, I think around 84, 83, 84. They the ones who pretty much ended the Jack and Jerry Briscoe, reign as tag team, as a tag team, from being that dominant tag team that just pretty much just outshined everybody. But Ricky Steamboat, man, he went over to WWF, and I tell you what, everybody who follows the WWF or the WWE, they know the incredible match that he had with Randy Savage. He became Intercontinental Champion over there. Had a very successful run over there in the WWE. Did not get the due that he deserved, in my opinion, and a lot of people's opinion. If you go back to the people who was watching it at that time, Ricky Steamboat definitely was the best wrestler. 100%, man. He was a way better wrestler than Hogan. The best wrestler in the WWE, and at one time Ricky Steamboat was the biggest fan favorite in wrestling. He was he got the most accolades as a fan favorite in wrestling. He was Sting before Sting. He was Magnum TA before Magnum TA. No, he never had the popularity of Hulk Hogan, because wrestling was not on that level at that time. But Ricky Steamboat at one time was the most popular wrestler in the world. Outside of he did not have the popularity of Andre the Giant. Everybody wanted Andre the Giant, but Ricky Steamboat was such a huge fan favorite, man. It was just amazing. People loved Ricky Steamboat. But Ricky Steamboat, man, was incredible. No ends, ands, and buts about it. And I have to say, to this day, this man, is one of the greatest tag team wrestlers that ever stepped foot in wrestling. In my opinion, the best tag team wrestler in the world that ever did it is Ricky Steamboat. And I'm talking about a solo. I'm talking about somebody who teamed in a lot of teams, and I got to put Ricky Steamboat as the number one guy, man. As far as if you wanted to win a world tag team championship, if you wanted to become major, team up with Ricky Steamboat. He was going to get you there. He definitely was going to get you there. You was going to win a world tag team championship if you was with Ricky Steamboat. There's no ends, ands, buts about that, man. He didn't just win with Jay Youngblood. He ended up winning a world tag team championship with Shane Douglas. He won a world tag team championship with Dustin Rhodes. And I'm not sure if he did with anybody else, but those are a couple other guys I know that he won a world tag team championship with. But this man held a lot of world tag team championships. And like I said, he was multiple times United States champion, and he finally got his dream of becoming the world champion. Now, he should have been NWA World Heavyweight Champion. In my opinion, that WCW World Heavyweight Championship that he won, I think he was NWA WCW champion when he won the WCW World Heavyweight Championship. I'm not sure if they had actually left the NWA, but that title lineage from WCW goes all the way back to the NWA. That is the actual NWA World Heavyweight Championship belt. I don't care what nobody says. It did not change from that, even though, the NWA went on and became something different. And then you had Dan Severn, and you had all these guys, man. And even one of my favorites now, with R-Truth becoming, NWA World Heavyweight Championship. In my opinion, that was not a World Heavyweight Championship. It just wasn't. The World Heavyweight Championship was that WCW belt. That's where WCW came from, and that's what it morphed into. So I'm definitely going to keep it there. You can call those other titles World Championships if you want to. They just are NWA. They just was a belt, in my opinion. But Ric Flair won the WCW World Heavyweight Championship in 1989. And let's say, I think he came back in 88, or was it 89? I think when he came back, and challenged Ric Flair for that title. And Ric Flair was my number one wrestler at this time. He was my favorite wrestler. Even though I love Sting, and I did love Sting. I think Sting at this time had become my number two favorite wrestler, unless you take away the Steiner brothers, because I think Scott Steiner, Rick Steiner, and Scott Steiner was my number 2 and 3. It was Scott Steiner, then Rick Steiner, and then Sting. I love Sting. So I did have my fan favorites and my heel wrestlers that I really liked a lot. But Ricky Steamboat, man, like I say, as soon as he came back to WCW, he was my number one. He was my favorite wrestler again. Automatically, it happened automatically. He was my number one wrestler. And Ric Flair became my number two wrestler. So when he started going after that title and he had those clashes with Ric Flair, yes, I wanted him to win the title. I wanted him to win the title. It was something I always wanted him to have ever since I first saw him, man, maybe 12, 13 years prior to the, when he came back. I always wanted to see him with a World Heavyweight Championship because he was that great of a wrestler. And he finally got his due, man, and he got those matches with Flair. And, man, hey, him and Flair always had great matches in the 70s. I think they had better matches in the 70s than they did, in that trilogy that they had up in the 80s, man, which was great and which everybody talks about now, and just all-time trilogy. And my favorite out of that was the 2 out of 3 Falls match that they had. I think that's one of the greatest matches of all time, and that's my number one when it comes to those two. But I think that's one of the greatest matches of all time. At one time, I had number one. A lot of people like to point to the Chi-Town Rumble, which was a great match, but I go with the 2 out of 3 Falls, man. That was just flat out incredible match. But he won the world title. And the thing about it is this, man, hey, I still was his biggest fan. A lot of people was. But I started feeling a certain way when he kept bringing his wife out. And, and then bringing his wife and the son out. I started feeling a certain way, and I stopped liking him. I didn't stop liking him completely, but he was not my number one wrestler anymore. Flair took that over. I wanted Flair to take the title from him. I didn't want him having that title. Hey, didn't have no problem with him bringing his family in there and doing that. It just got to the point where I didn't like it, and I'm glad a lot of other people went that same way. The fans just turned on him. The fans went the same way. And that's the first time I ever seen fans really turn against Ricky Steamboat. So then after that, man, we know what happened. He went on again and won some more World Tag Team Championships. I think he went right after that. He won a World Tag Team Championship with Shane Douglas, which I really didn't care for that team because I didn't care for Shane Douglas, but I knew that he had a winner when he had Ricky Steamboat. And Dustin Rhodes, Dustin was coming up. Didn't have many problems with Dustin, but I knew he would look better with Ric Flair. But Dustin, great wrestler in his own right, the son of Dusty Rhodes. But, man, yeah, that's all I'm pretty much going to say about my man Ricky Steamboat. Ricky Steamboat, incredible, one of my favorite wrestlers of all time. And even now, man, that I see him now, showed up on AEW the other night, AEW, him and Ric Flair. It was hard for me to pick and say which one of these guys is my favorite wrestler of all time. I'm going to have to go with Ric Flair because of everything that Ric Flair represented, everything he did. Man, but I have such a love for Ricky Steamboat. And I think if that was Flair, if Flair would have took him on in his last match, I think I would have been rolling with Ricky Steamboat. I really do. I really do. I think I'm not sure besides the last match. I think that's the only match. And there was hundreds of matches between Flair and Steamboat. Believe me, guys, I've seen a lot of them. Live at Greenville Memorial Auditorium growing up. There was a lot of matches between Steamboat and Flair. But, man, I tell you what, the only time I remember going for Ric Flair was the last match, the Chi-Town Rumble. I went for Ric Flair to take that title from Ricky Steamboat. I was so happy. And, man, I hate it because, his son was there. But, because of his family, that's the reason that I turned against him. That's the reason a lot of people turned against him. I didn't turn completely against him. I still was a huge fan of him. But, man, he kind of went down in my book. And I think Sting surpassed him at that time, and a few other wrestlers in my eyes. Scott Steiner surpassed him at that time, and I remember he wrestled Scott Steiner. Ricky Steamboat was the world television champion, and Scott Steiner took that title off of him. I kind of wanted I wanted him to beat Rick Steiner. Then Scott Steiner, but then I wanted Steiner to win the title, even though Steiner was kind of arrogant or whatever. I remember that, when they was out there on the mic against each other, and Steiner was kind of arrogant. But I kind of I started turning and going for Scott Steiner. It's just that's something that just didn't set good with me about his family coming out there when he was the world champion and how he represented that. And it just didn't set well with me, man. But, hey, now, man, I look at him. I look at the legend that he is and everything. And, I like to just put that as a footnote that I like to forget. I'm never going to forget it. But, him bringing that family out. But, hey, I'm glad that Ricky Steamboat was a WCW world champion. I'm going to say he was an NWA world champion. Great wrestler, man, that deserves all the accolades that he got in the sport. And he deserved a lot more, man. He deserved a lot more. But, guys, I'm out here on the road. So if you hear background noise or anything like that, that's because I'm out here on the road. But, guys, I'm definitely You know, I'm glad that you came in. And before you leave out, hit that like, share, join, man. Definitely hit that like, share, join, whatever platform you own, and hit that subscribe button, man. Hit that notification bell. If you here on YouTube, do the same thing on Twitch. And man, hey, join us, man. Follow us. Follow the Straight Up Wrestling Show. If you over on Twitter, man, not Twitter, but X, formerly known as Twitter, go ahead and follow Straight Up Wrestling Show, guys. Let me get off here, man, because one thing I've realized as I've gotten older is, hey, I don't drive as good on the highway as I used to. With goodness sake, wow, I just don't drive as good anymore on this highway, man, and I think I'm doing something wrong here, like I used to, man. I done messed up. I messed up. Wow, guys, I'm about to let you guys go. Y'all guys have a good evening. Talk to you later.